So it appears that we have now officially reached the halftime show of RWBY Volume 8. And with that, I'd just like to first off say greetings, loyal RWBY fans. The reason I call you all loyal is that it takes one special kind of fan to continue to stomach the ongoing continuity that has become a beloved Rooster Teeth animated show. I mean, seriously, if you were able to continue to watch RWBY past Volume 4, you must have been in it for two reasons. The slim chance of hope that this show could return to its glory days, or watch the fires burn of what's left of it. So RWBY family, I consider you all family at this point because I believe we've been through a lot, and I believe it's very few of us left that are continuing to view this series. I'd like to ask, what can we possibly do at this point of RWBY Volume 8, Episode 8 to fix what's already been broken? So I pondered up 5 questions that I would like the show to answer in hopes that it would better resolve out the issues going on with this volume, as well as 5 actions that I would love for this show to take place to help smooth out any of the inconsistencies that happened in the previous volumes or previous episodes. Question 1 being, what is Emerald's deal? I mean, we haven't seen this character for many volumes now, and all we know about Emerald is that she used to grow up poor and fought her way using her semblance to be able to survive, and Cinder took a liking to her and recruited her. But then, what did she turn into? She looks like she just turned into a character that was just loyal and indebted to Cinder, almost mirroring Cinder's backstory that we've recently seen. This volume is the most we've ever seen her. Included that she has a new outfit change, we've began to notice that Emerald is viewing Salem as a bigger threat than she had hoped. And for good reason, mind you. Salem's diabolical plan is working, and Emerald is seeing it full front and center. But it seems that she can't break away from Cinder's grasp. Cinder's grasp is more so what I would like to refer to as her loyalty to her. It never seems to be quite apparent as to why she continues to go about this process. At this point, it seems that Emerald is doing whatever she can to please Cinder. And it seems that even with her loyalty being intact, Cinder has no business with her, or no dealings to make her feel special, and feel like she should continue to be loyal to her. So you then begin to ask, will Emerald ever wake up out of this nightmare, or continue to be in this dreamland that Cinder is the best thing coming of Jesus?
Cinder isn't here to protect you anymore.
Which leads to my second question. What is Cinder's end goal here? The writing team has insisted that Cinder is going to be a character that has different motives that split off from Salem's. I mean, if we look at her build-up as a villain, we can see the decisions that she has made has had a deep impact on her life. She has made choices that clearly go against Salem, and has paid the punishment for them in many ways. But the writers have insisted that we should understand that Cinder was just brought up to be a servitude of higher authority, and to be bullied and emotionally abused by those around her. Being under someone's control was never to be Cinder's gig. She wanted to break free of anyone's masking hold of her so that she can branch out to be her own person. I've always believed that once she obtained the Fall Maiden power and went about going after RWBY and her own selfish desires, that she was going to be someone that was going to turn against Salem at the end and be the ultimate villain that Team RWBY would have to take down. But is she really a hard threat to take down? It seems that Raven was able to best her with her Spring Maiden powers, Penny has done a decent job at keeping her back, and we have the one big counter to Grimm power, and that is the Silver Eyes, which RWBY has done twice that's showing that can put Cinder down for good. Emerald seems to be the only person that Cinder can depend on at this point. But that isn't enough to improve on what she needs to do for herself. I believe Cinder is at a crossroad here, and she's going to make a choice that's going to impact not only herself, but Emerald as well. So that leads me to believe that I'm not sure what the writers intend to do for Cinder at this point. I can only question to believe that Cinder will be the ultimate villain, but at what cost is the better question. Speaking of Salem, that leads to question 3. What is the relationship between Summer Rose and Salem? From the context of what we understood from when Raven was explaining to Yang and Weiss about the connection between Salem and Ozpin, we know that Summer also knows about the history between those two. And due to Summer Rose possessing the power against Grimm, in fact, the Silver Eyes,
It was said that those born with silver eyes were destined to lead the life of a warrior.
we know that Salem and Summer Rose have done battle with each other in the past. So it leads us to believe what exactly happened during their fight, and what does the Silver Eyes power have in connection to the Grimm? From what we know about Silver Eyed powers is that they are fueled by strong desires and to preserve life. And as Maria explained, it's emotional, much like how symbolisms work. And we know from Grimm is that they hunt down and are attracted to negative emotion, stress, and anxiety. From what we understood about Summer Rose is that she was a great person, and possibly the best candidate to use the Silver-Eyed power, but it didn't grant her justice to defeat Salem, the Immortal. So we need to ask ourselves, how did that fight end, and what exactly does Salem remember about Summer Rose, and how this ties in with RWBY at all? I'm now going to segue myself into my fourth question, which I believe is the most important amongst them all, is what does Ozpin actually have planned, or is it all just really hopeless? Ozpin is so important to this story, it's not even funny. His connections to Salem already speaks enough. But what exactly does this man come from when he believes that he has no answer to how to stop Salem? It seems that from his quest from the God of Light to obtain the relics went away and he trusted the maidens to keep lock and key of all these relics, he decided to turn tail and train warriors to fight against our infinite armies of Grimm. To lead to what exactly? The acts of recruiting huntresses is what led people like Hazel to become so adamant on destroying Ozpin. He recruited people to fight against an army that would never stop, and to fight against a villain that could never die. So we need to date back to what Ozpin's whole purpose was when he was revived by the gods. It was to hope to bring the relics together, and for hope that the human race would accept one another and live in harmony, and that way the gods would return and make them whole again with using magic. But Ozpin completely diverged from that goal and decided to reincarnate himself through many different people in hopes of planning out this fight against Salem repeatedly over the years. This man's whole plan has seeming to play keep away with Salem as far as making sure she does not touch the relics and making sure to build his army of huntresses and hunters to stop the Grimm forever entering these territories to open the vaults. But if you look at this turnout, it seems that Salem has made a decisive win over Atlas, and her reign is soon about to begin. So we must ask ourselves, is Ozpin really out of options? Or is there a plan secretly he's coming up with Oscar in hand that's going to turn this hopeless situation into a victorious one? Which leads me to my last question, which is simply, what is Hazel's point in all of this? Hazel is the one character I would least suspect to be able to help Ozpin out of his situation. He has everything against Ozpin and he is rightfully to feel this way. Why couldn't this have been Emerald? Hazel hates Ozpin for what he's done to his sister. And for what reasons be, Ozpin is trying to convince Hazel to use Jin for the last question to see if he's telling the truth about Salem. But in regards of whatever the question he may ask her, why does he think he'll ask the question that he's hoping that Hazel will ask of her? Hazel at this point, I'm not sure will use that question to find out the truth, but what is it that he doesn't already know? These are the last two recorded questions that Jin was asked for. So it makes you think, what is it that Hazel could ask that could actually help their situation, except for finding out more truths that this man could have easily explained, but Hazel just doesn't want to believe. But then again, maybe he already believes it and just doesn't care. Now that I've gotten the questions out of the way, which I'm sure maybe 2 or 3 of these questions may be answered, it's time to get down to the last bit of this video. And these are 5 actions that I would like the team to consider of putting into this volume to hopefully make it better. This first action I speak a lot to with friends as far as my issues with RWBY, and I'm sure many of you have already realized it by now, but it seems that RWBY has a weird influx of characters they love to bring into each volume, and this is where my first action dictates. These characters need to stay as side characters. I do not need to keep witnessing the characters that are not important to the story have moments to give insight or purposes of moving the story along. This should be for the main character's job. And who are the main characters? These are all the characters recorded for Volume 8 that have appeared so far. But let me show you who has had the most time giving their insight, opinions, and overall bigger understandings of what's going on. You see how problematic this is? Team RWBY is not the center of the RWBY animated show. This leads to the second action that I believe should take place. And this seems to be quite a simple fix, but it seems like it will be quite hard for the writers to do. And that is to make Team RWBY remain in charge for moving the story along. There needs to be a natural order of their developments going through this volume. Point being one is that RWBY needs to start being a leader for once. It has been times in previous volumes where RWBY has shown leadership, but has totally forgot about those and has instead been a dim-witted character that doesn't even understand her own semblance. That is a big issue. Weiss, on the other hand, has been quite balanced with how the writers have been handling her character. She's had ups and downs, but she's been able to move on from those moments to see the bigger picture, and that's always great to see. But what I'm starting to miss is that Weiss isn't really looking out for RWBY as she stated she would, as being the best teammate and partner that she could have. Then we have Yang, which I've covered already in a previous video if you'd like to go watch it, but I see that she is the more emotional support for the team. Where she may not have always the logical answers that everyone needs, she has that go with your gut feeling that always usually ends in a good result. But lately it seems that her intuitiveness has not really been a beneficiary to the team at all. It seems to be going against them, in fact, which I actually like. I like the fact that not all the players of Team RWBY are on the same page. But when they're not on the same page, the problem is that the side characters are stealing their moments of speaking to one another to get their point across. And that's where the first action needs to take more precedence. The side characters are great, but the Team RWBY cast needs to speak more on how they feel about things, especially seeing as that they are the ones looked at making all the calls and shots. And you know who else should be looked at? The maidens. I believe they do not get enough representation in this show. The concept of the maidens are very interesting. I love the idea that they represent all the seasons. But from what we know about these maidens and who possesses their power, there are only 3 characters. Cinder, who is the Fall Maiden, Penny, who is now the Winter Maiden, and Raven, who is the Spring Maiden. The issue, I believe, is what is so problematic, is that none of the main cast possesses a maiden power. And you may think to yourself, Team RWBY doesn't exactly need to be maidens to be so great, but the thing is that look at how the maidens reflect the actual team that is RWBY. I mean, look at their personalities, look at what they represent. Each member of Team RWBY definitely can define a maiden. You have the fall, which is Blake, you have the winter, which is Weiss, you have the summer, which is Yang, and you have RWBY, which is spring. It's not hard to put this together and believe that these characters could be the maidens. In fact, because the 4 maidens are 4 women, and the only team that has a team of 4 women and that are important to the story are Team RWBY. But Cinder being the antagonist possessing a maiden power is actually interesting. The only issue is that Penny possesses the Winter Maiden power. If it was Penny or if it was Winter, the issue that I had with either of them obtaining the Winter Maiden power was that we were not going to stay focused on them, but eventually diverge off and continue on with the main cast. I believe it would have been stronger and more impactful if one of the main characters possessed a power that they would now have to understand the responsibilities of possessing said power. But we're never going to get that, being as that the characters that have this power now are side characters. This makes me wish that the Spring Maiden powers that Raven possessed would have passed on to Yang during her battle with Cinder, and that way we don't have to ever return back to Raven, but we can have that final closure that she gave Yang, something that she could depend on and fight back against that could become helpful for Team RWBY. But we're not going to get that because we're probably never going to go back to Raven in this story for quite some time. And since we won't get the fact that none of the Team RWBY members have the Maiden powers, at this point during the war, I guess it's just safe to say that I hope that we get a Star Wars Cavalry moment. Star Wars Cavalry moment is just simply put that when the heroes are in peril, their allies shall come in many different forces to come and be of assistance. So that means that the beacon that RWBY sent out to everyone will eventually cause them to all be proactive and come help and defend whatever's left of Atlas. So I'm finally down to my 5th action, and this is more of a personal request that I am trying to figure out if this is probably the reason why there's so many issues with Volume 8. Now I believe it is the fact that the writing direction is split off into too many people's hands. If you take a look at each episode, you can see that the writing as far as who is in charge of it is changing per episode. And this is not to start a witch hunt and blaming who's the reason why we're having such problematic episodes, but to show that the direction of a series like this cannot be just handed off to each person to write their own pieces on. This is not a comic book. So I believe that if they could actually keep the writers consistent and writing out this whole volume, at least we can see what their intentions were from start to finish, than trying to start from one person's perspective and go to another person's perspective, not sure if this actually matches up. RWBY Volume 8 has taken a nice short break in trying to catch up and realize what they need to do for the rest of this volume. And who knows if my questions or actions actually take place, but I believe they should, or at least take some of these things and consider them for future volumes if it goes down to it. But the public release of the next episode is coming out soon on Saturday, February 13th. So we'll have to see what the writers and the team decides to take the direction on. I hope to see you all there, and I hope to hear what your opinions are when we come back to this video and discuss, but feel free to leave your comments. And until then, I will see you guys next time.